It's September 11th, 2016. This is Seaside Reactions. Your host, Kenneth Arthur, coming to you right after the Seahawks game with a couple hours buffer to talk about the Seattle Seahawks 12-10 victory over the Miami Dolphins. This is not a show that I necessarily thought I was going to do, but people were asking during the preseason when the instant reaction show if it was coming back, even though Danny Kelly had left for the Ringer and I didn't have anybody to partner up with. And I kind of just put it in the back of my mind. But then today, more requests for some sort of instant reaction podcast. I'm not bringing anyone on with me. Maybe I will if there are other instant reaction shows. But I just don't know what else to say about it. We got a lot of great writers at fieldgoals.com. Go to fieldgoals.com. We got a lot of articles going up right now after the game. Jackson Bevins is going to have his cigar thoughts reaction up on fieldgoals.com probably by the time that you're listening to this. I know he's writing it as I'm saying these words. Alistair Corp, he's got the quick takes going up. Monday morning, there will be reactions from Nick Polak, and I had a small recap. But, of course, there's always more, but I really think that there's going to be plenty of coverage with the reading-wise. But some people, I guess, they want that auditory recap or some thoughts on the game, especially now as the Seahawks move out to 1-0. They're starting the season with a win, not something that they got last season, not something that necessarily looked like it was going to happen late in the game, but the Seahawks do pull out a 12-10 win over the Miami Dolphins. A very ugly win, but for NFL football in particular, I mean, other sports maybe too. I think I've started to lose touch with all other sports besides NFL football, but NFL football, it's so reactionary, and not just in the Seaside Reaction, aka Real in the Field Goals Instant Reaction podcast. But overall, people, they just have such a short memory. One of the great things about Russell Wilson and all great athletes and a lot of great people in high pressure situations that they have a short memory. But fans have the shortest memories of all, and that's where, you'd think fans could be the greatest quarterback of all time because their memories are the same as a housefly that just goes away. And so everybody panicking about the Seahawks, going into the game even, panicking about the Seahawks, concerns about the offensive line, concerns about being able to block Damakung Su and Cameron Wake and that Dolphins great defensive line, totally legitimate concerns. But overall, the Seahawks went into this game with so many advantages that certainly I was not overly concerned. Of course, I was aware of the possibility of a loss, but I think the Seahawks were right to be the most favored team of the weekend. I'm not going to change that opinion just because they barely won over the Miami Dolphins. Everything was pointing to them needing to having the opportunity to come away with a fairly substantial 10-point win, but they didn't do that. But it's still short memories. Hey, this has happened so many times in the Russell Wilson era, so many times in the Pete Carroll era, even during Super Bowl seasons. It happens. They get off to slow starts. They look bad. Russell Wilson looks bad. They figured out Russell Wilson. The receivers aren't that great. The defense isn't that great. And that's not to say that some of these players should come away from this game feeling worse about them, with you feeling maybe worse about them in some degree, or at least concerned with how they played. And definitely others outplayed what I thought they would do, and that's something else to take into consideration. But overall, the most important thing is that, when you're getting these early season games in, the most important thing is that you can evaluate yourself, and hopefully, as you start to evaluate the team and make those adjustments, as the Seahawks are so good at doing, not only at halftime, but at halftime of the season, why they play so much better in the second half of the year. They've got adjustments going on constantly, looking at the tape and figuring out how they can adjust to not make the same mistakes twice. So you're just hoping that as you're making those adjustments and as you're learning about what sort of team you have, you come away with wins. So even if it's an ugly win, even if it's not the win that most fans would have wanted, or some of them, like myself, would have expected, it is a win, and they get to 1-0, much better than starting 0-2 last season, much better than starting 2-4, much better than anything else. Above all else, The final score is nice, but the most important digit next to a dash, next to a digit, is the win-loss record. And so it's 1-0 and very close to being 0-1. Russell Wilson goes 27 of 43 in this game for 258 yards, 6 yards per attempt, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. He was sacked 3 times for a loss of 18 yards, had a passer rating of 77.5, and Sue inadvertently stepped on his ankle. It was inadvertent, but he did step on the ankle. Russell Wilson saying that, he didn't have hardly any mobility after the game, saying he didn't have a lot of mobility in that ankle. So, all the more impressive that he was able to do what he did on that final drive. The fact that he did it on one ankle, didn't get into specifics on what sort of tests would be done this week. But I think you can be encouraged that Russell Wilson did stay in the game and that he was able to play well. There were also, you could go back to week 3 of the preseason when Cliff Averill sacked Tony Romo, and Tony Romo said, I'm ready to go back in the game. They're not going to put him back in the game. But it seemed like everything was going to be okay with Romo, and it turned out that it wasn't. Is that possible with Russell Wilson? Sure, anything is possible. But I feel good about Russell Wilson's health right now, and I'm certainly not going to concern myself with it until I have something more concrete with which to be concerned. Russell Wilson's play in the game, I think it's interesting. 43 pass attempts in this game, a career high for the regular season, but not a career high totally. The last time was 48 pass attempts against the Carolina Panthers in their playoff loss. So he has thrown for 91 passes in his last 2 games. And remember, Pete Carroll has insisted that even though Russell Wilson's pass attempts have gone up in 4 consecutive seasons leading into this year, saying that they're not going to just start turning it into a Drew Brees type offense. This is a run first team. This is not going to be, you're not going to see those huge volume numbers from Russell Wilson because that's not what we do, and that may very well be true. And the type of game that they played against the Carolina Panthers called for Russell Wilson down 31-0 to throw the ball more. But this one, interestingly, was 43 pass attempts compared to 28 rush attempts that didn't go to Wilson by running backs. A pretty substantial difference. And he had 26 in the first half, the most that he's had in a half. So it wasn't just playing at the end trying to catch up. 26 in the first half, the most he's ever had in a half. And, overall, there were definitely things that you would like and the things that Russell Wilson can do. There were good moments from Russell Wilson, especially on those final drives, picking up really important first downs, that really cool, calm demeanor that doesn't allow Russell Wilson to panic in situations like this one, that helped him find Doug Baldwin for the game-winning touchdown throw. Nearly seemed like it would be negated on a flag, but it wasn't. There was no penalty. But Russell Wilson, excellent final drive. And I think that's what you really are hoping for out of Wilson at this point, is understanding that there are going to be times when he doesn't look that great. He did have a bad decision, and that's even more rare, is a rare bad decision on his interception when he's flushed out of the pocket to throw it up into a place where there was really 3 Miami defenders and I think 1, receiver, and it was just a poor decision on Russell Wilson's part there. But overall, a fine game by Wilson, especially given the fact that Germain Ifedi, the right guard, was out. They had to plug in Jamarcus Webb. Caused a little bit maybe of havoc. I don't know how bad Webb played. I know that, the most watched play of the game, I think, was on that. It was on that. There was a fumble lost. Mark Lewinsky tripping Wilson as he was trying to hand the ball off. That's caused the fumble. Mark Lewinsky just got bull rushed. So not a great moment for Mark Lewinsky. Left tackle Bradley Sowell, he had a holding penalty, and that's not the best moment for Bradley Sowell. Overall, not a great game for the offensive line. They got pushed around, though it is a great defensive line. They may be seeing an even better one next week against the LA Rams with Aaron Donald and Robert Quinn. We won't know what happens to the Rams until Monday night, but certainly going to be a concern headed into LA next weekend will be how that offensive line performs and adjusts and gets better going into week 2. That's going to be certainly a concern. And you just hope that Ifedi comes back. But even then, Ifedi comes back, more adjustments on the offensive line, more changing, more shuffling, and not necessarily a bad thing, shuffling helped the offensive line quite a bit last season in the middle of the year when Drew Nowak was pulled, but still you were just waiting for some sort of consistency, and definitely not a great game for the offensive line. Kristen Michael gets the most carries, 15 carries for 66 yards, 4.4 a carry. Thomas Rawls, 12 for 32, 2.7 yards per carry. They both played, fairly okay. And I think it was just a tough defense to play against and a bad performance by the offensive line. Overall, I thought Thomas Rawls, given, the fact that he got just 2 preseason carries, that he missed so much time in training camp, that he missed off the whole offseason, that he broke his ankle against the Ravens last year, given everything, a good performance by Thomas Rawls. He also catches 3 passes for 26 yards. And a good performance by Kristen Michael. I think a typical Kristen Michael performance, though there were definitely a couple plays there where he had some really game, important, impactful plays in the fourth quarter on his carries. Didn't fumble the ball, held on to the ball really well, and did everything that you would hope out of Kristen Michael, given that he did get 15 carries. CJ Prosise had 1 carry for -2 yards and also a catch for 13 yards. That really showed what CJ Prosise was brought in here to do. He was injured in the game. Another concern with CJ Prosise being that injury history and being the fact that he got hurt again today. They did say, however, that he was available in the second half on special teams if necessary. So it seems like CJ Prosise, another injury, but with any luck, not one that holds him out of the game next week. And I think that once they start to really incorporate Prosise into the offense as the third down back, he will really be improving and helping that offensive line with the blocking, helping with the passing game, being that outlet for Russell Wilson. And I think that CJ Prosise's impact on the game will be significant. Doug Baldwin, this guy has elevated his game to another level. I've said in the past, and to some degree definitely still believe it, but I've said in the past, talked about how I don't think that at a certain point players really improve. I think, at a certain age, and a younger age than you may expect, 21, 22, 23, guys sort of become what they are, and then they get put in better systems. And I think in a large part of the sense of the word, that is what Doug Baldwin is doing, at the age of 26 last year, 27 last year, 28 this year. I think that they were putting him in a better position with which to produce. He got 98 targets in 2014. He got 103 targets in 2015. And he got 72 the year before that. So his targets went up 31 targets from 2013 to 2015. Significant. And, that's why you would expect to see his yards a game go up. But his catch percentage at 75.7% last season. And today he catches 9 of 11 targets. He's going to get a career high in targets this year. He goes 9 for 92 and a touchdown. He's Russell Wilson's best receiver. He's the guy that Russell Wilson's going to count on. He's the guy that he threw the touchdown to. He's the guy that saved their asses in the fourth quarter when they were desperate on fourth down and needed a first down. It was Doug Baldwin coming through again in the clutch. Last season, 14 touchdowns. This season, he starts off with another touchdown. I think Doug Baldwin has gone from being a very good slot receiver over the first 3 to 4 years of his career to being a premier receiver that is, unmatched in terms of being a slot receiver in the NFL, and really just sort of like on that level where he can be as important to the Seahawks as most receivers in the NFL are to their teams. He doesn't have that size advantage. He doesn't have those physical attributes that are so rare. But he does have other attributes that are rare that help make him one of the best receivers in the NFL. Over the last half of last season, he had 724 yards, and 12 touchdowns. In 8 games, he had 12 touchdowns and 724 yards, and he starts off this season with another touchdown and 92 yards. So great game by Doug Baldwin. Jermaine Kearse, 5 for 57. Tyler Lockett, really quiet, 3 catches on 8 targets for 17 yards. So that's going to be something that obviously they'll have to adjust to. How can they make sure that the target's going to Tyler Lockett? He's got to catch those passes, but also how can we make sure that we're putting him in the best position to do that? Paul Richardson, he had 1 long target that was just too long, whether he couldn't catch up to, it was just out of his reach, not a catchable pass. But they were going to Paul Richardson deep. They're going to be looking for him as that deep threat. He catches 1 pass for 11 yards. But I think that Paul Richardson won't have big numbers on the season, but he will make some of the biggest plays of the season. So that's something to look out for as well. Defensively, I think a lot of people, of course, for good reasons, are going to talk about Cassius Marsh on special teams. He had the block, and he just played really well on special teams, getting tackles, making a name for himself. When you say someone's name on special teams that isn't the punter or the returner or the field goal kicker, it's a special thing that's probably happening, that he's doing something right and rare and hard to find. And Cassius Marsh has been making an impact on special teams for the last 2 years, but now he's really becoming an impact player on special teams and could be in contention for that Pro Bowl spot that goes to a special teams specialist, as it were. That could be Cassius Marsh this year. Overall, he has 4 total tackles and a sack and a blocked field goal that really changed the game. The Seahawks winning by 2 points. Cassius Marsh, an incredible game for him, and he's going to be someone to watch out for. Jaron Reed, 2 tackles, but 2 passes defense, 2 batted down passes at the line of scrimmage. Incredible. Almost caused an interception. And if he's got 2 today, how many could he have on the season? It's that type of batted passes that really cause a lot of errors for offenses and create opportunities for defenses. So Reed's impact can mean more than just as a run stuffer. If he's going to be out there actively being able to know where to put his hands up and get big and get reach and be able to bat those passes up in the air, Reed can have a huge impact. And he was excellent today. And I thought that Deshaun Shedd obviously was excellent, playing opposite of Richard Sherman, outshined Richard Sherman, and obviously outshined Earl Thomas, who clearly had a bad game. Everybody pointing out Earl Thomas missing tackles, taking the wrong angles, being out of position. There was a play, the 50-yard pass to Arian Foster. Earl Thomas can be seen prominently in that, but Marsh said that he took blame for that after the loss, or after the game, saying that that was his assignment and he was the one that screwed up and did not take it out on Thomas. But clearly Thomas, an all-pro safety, one of the best players in the NFL, had a bad game, and that's the type of thing that he's going to have to adjust to as the season goes on. KJ Wright, 11 tackles, a sack, a QB hit. Cam Chancellor, 7 tackles. Bobby Wagner, 2 QB hits. He was really rushing the passer more. It seemed like more than normal. Michael Bennett, 6 tackles, a sack, 3 QB hits. Michael Bennett was all over it. And that's going to be something encouraging, going into next week against the Rams, is that pass rush that overall had 4 sacks, 8 QB hits, did really well against what was supposed to be a pretty good offensive line, though they were out without Mike Pouncey. Supposed to be a pretty good offensive line. So that pass rush looked pretty good. And I think that obviously the performance of Deshaun Shedd should be encouraging for people as well. Not a lot of talk necessary about the Sam position. We talked a lot about the strong side linebacker, the Sam linebacker. Mike Morgan, 2 tackles. I think one of them was on special teams. There wasn't a lot to be said. I don't know what the snaps yet are going to be broken down to, but I think that's something that's not really a big concern, or as big of a concern as we thought it might be. All offseason sort of talking about who's going to replace Bruce Irvin. And in this game, it didn't really show itself up that much. As far as I can tell at this point. Frank Clark also with an early sack. Frank Clark with a sack. How many sacks will Frank Clark get on the year? I could ask myself questions if there was 2 people here. Kenneth, how many sacks do you think Frank Clark will get on the year based on this game against the Miami Dolphins? Well, that's not that good of a question, Kenneth, I must say. I think that Frank Clark did get a sack today, and I think that he will get more sacks than the 3.5 that he got last season. But I can't just base that off of one game. Anything could happen in one game. I think that you'll find that perhaps, some guys get 8 sacks in a month. No, that's probably some sort of record. Some guys get 4 sacks in a month and then don't get another sack for the entire rest of the year. I found out recently that Kiko Alonso, all 5 of his career interceptions have come in September and in only 6 games. All 5. 6 games. And today he had a turnover as well. Kiko Alonso did. So September is his year. I wrote about it over on is his month. I wrote about it over on sportsonearth.com. You can check that stuff out on sportsonearth.com. But Yeah, I don't know how many sacks Frank Clark will get on the season based on today's game, but I do think that the Seahawks look like a team that will get more sacks than they did a year ago, and that's going to be important. Turning those QB hurries and QB hits into sacks and to losses and to the strip sacks. We saw at the end of the game as the Miami Dolphins were trying to mount enough of a comeback to get into at least a field goal range with maybe a second left if they could get out of bounds or whatever. They were able to get to Ryan Tannehill. That's some good coverage there by the Seahawks. Although on the first play, a very scary throw down the field to a guy that was wide open, but not within anywhere near the ball. But so like that wasn't turned out to be that bad. But then they sacked Tannehill, and then they didn't get a safety on him, or did get a safety on him. No points added. But I think that the Seahawks pass rush is really good. I think Frank Clark could definitely be in that range of 8 sacks, one every other game. And I think that would be totally good and fair and a nice job for Clark in his second season. Michael Bennett's going to be probably around that same range of 8 to 9 to 10 sacks. Last year was a career high. And maybe Cliff Averill, he could be somewhere. It just seems like it's going to be really even. And but maybe if someone does jump out, maybe it will be Frank Clark. We don't know yet, but that was a really, really good performance by the front seven and most of the secondary, even though, Ryan Tannehill's numbers. What did you think today of Ryan Tannehill, Kenneth? Man, well, I thought Tannehill was a pretty bad quarterback going into the season. To be fair, this was the guy that was like 32nd in QBR last year. That puts him at maybe the bottom rung of quarterbacks, and we're sort of overlooking it because his touchdown and interception numbers are okay. He sort of reminds me of a lesser Matt Ryan, and like can he go in there and be better? He's got more weapons now than he's ever had. Arian Foster played really well. He finished the game with 2.9 yards per carry, but Arian Foster looked pretty good in the beginning. And then he's got Jarvis Landry. Kenny Stills, terrible drop. Ryan Tannehill did put a ball in the air to a wide open Kenny Stills, and Stills just dropped it. And the whole game changes at that point if that happens. All the stats change at that point if that happens. The secondary still has to go in there and watch. And that's what I'm saying, is that you go in there in week 1, you play the game, and you hope to win because you've got so many things to watch and adjust to for next week. And hopefully by the end of the year, you're your best self. But it's like Ryan Tannehill, you got Jarvis Landry, Arian Foster, Kenny Stills, Jordan Cameron. He didn't have Devontae Parker. He didn't have Mike Pouncey. But he did finish with just 6.4 yards per attempt, more than Russell Wilson. But that 50 yards to Arian Foster, even if you equal it out with the drop by Kenny Stills, that 50 yards to Arian Foster, how many downfield completions did Ryan Tannehill have? And then he did have a nice final drive that actually put the, before that put the Dolphins ahead 10-6. But, I just don't think it was that great of performance, though I do think, the Seahawks, Shad played really well. Jerron Reed was very disruptive. They sacked him. So I'm going to say that the Seahawks defense maybe won this game against Ryan Tannehill rather than Ryan Tannehill being totally inept, because it was a good defensive performance. Though I will say Tannehill had some bad plays that I think in the future, when he's not playing against the Seahawks defense, that's when he's going to have to prove, is there something better than just 32nd in QBR, which even if you think QBR is a bunk stat, there aren't going to be any stats where you're going to find Ryan Tannehill as a top 10 quarterback. So anything you find, he's going to be maybe the 20th. He's going to be somewhere around the 15 to 20 range. And Ryan Tannehill, as a franchise quarterback, aren't you going to want at least someone that's in the top 12? Overall, Kiko Alonso, that's right, he plays for the Dolphins. Hey, when I started this podcast today, I had to think for like 5 seconds about which team the Seahawks played today. Once the game is over, I have a short memory too. I blamed you for having a short memory. I got a short memory. I had to think about it. Also, there's just a lot going on in the brain because I have to watch all the games. Hey, Seahawks 12, Dolphins 10. Seahawks are 1-0. Next week against the LA Rams, what am I looking for? They got to find a way to block Aaron Donald. That's clear. They're going to have to be able to do something about Aaron Donald. Justin Britt, didn't hear a lot about his name today, so that's probably a good thing. No, Aaron snaps. Nolan Freeze definitely, some concerns there again at long snapper. But getting back to Justin Britt, him and, Jamarcus Webb or Mark Lewinsky, Webb and Lewinsky are definitely going to have to step their games up if they're going to be able to tag team and block Aaron Donald. And then you're going to have to worry about Quinn. You're going to have to worry about William Hayes. You're going to have to worry about Michael Brockers. That's the biggest concern, especially looking at what almost happened to Russell Wilson today and how much under duress he was. That's going to have to happen. But also the Seahawks are going to have to find a way to take advantage, of that bull rush and maybe like being able to, do something that gets behind them, whether it's screen passes or the zone read option, being able to pull off some plays that really take advantage of it in any way that they can, because they're going to have to find a way to get an advantage. And, other than that, what I know about the Rams, they don't have much going on in the passing game right now. They're going to have to use, the gimmicks with Tavon Austin and how unusual he is as a offensive weapon, a running back / receiver. And so they're going to have to find a way to contain that, but I don't have that many concerns defensively. So I think, again, it's going to be a low-scoring game. And so can you go on the road in a divisional game, in the first game in L.A., a regular season game, the first time in 22 years, are you going to be able to go in there and win a low-scoring 15-10 type game? That's going to be the key for the Seahawks. So it's going to be a big special teams play. We saw Tyler Lockett, do pretty well. And just want to see if so he had a 22-yard punt return overall, 3 for 40. But they're going to have to see maybe a big special teams play. Of course, it's the Rams, so you're going to have to stop them on special teams because they could be the one pulling off the big special teams play. You're going to have to play perfect defense and maybe cause a couple turnovers. The Seahawks won this game today despite losing, the turnover battle, and that's a problem. That they can't lose the turnover battle. It's been all turned around and screwed up lately, is that they would win the turnover battle and lose the games, or lose the turnover battle and win the games. But here they lose the turnover battle again, win the game. That's not going to happen in LA. You got to go down to LA. You got to win the turnover battle and win the game. If you lose the turnover battle, if you get beaten on special teams, that's going to be a problem for them. Overall, I would say that right now it could be hard to envision a game that goes much differently than the one that we saw today against the Dolphins. Another low-scoring game, and perhaps another ugly game. Aaron Donald against Russell Wilson all day long, and then just Case Keenum, if he's still the starter next week, trying to just disrupt him in the same way that they disrupted Ryan Tannehill, and being able to cover those receivers. And that shouldn't be a problem, you would think. It would have been interesting to see what the Dolphins would have looked like today with Devontae Parker, but they didn't have him. And, going up against the Rams and their receivers, not the best core in the NFL. And I would love to see something out of Paul Richardson. I'd love to see a big play out of Paul Richardson. I'd love to see Tyler Lockett be more active on offense. And Jimmy Graham. Jimmy Graham comes in. He played 2 snaps, I think, in the first half. He played on the first snap of the second half, but then they brought him in that final drive and said, hey, look, remember we have this guy, Jimmy Graham, the all-pro tight end, that guy that, was really one of the big major stars of the NFL from like 2011 to 2014. Well, we got him back now. He catches an 11-yard pass on that drive. That's what we can really have with Jimmy Graham. It's amazing. 10 months after tearing his patellar tendon, Victor Cruz missed 2 seasons when he did that. 10 months after doing it, Jimmy Graham, this big man, gets out there. He plays. That's incredible. Thomas Rawls plays. But I think you'd love to see Jimmy Graham come in next week. Maybe he gets 20 snaps. What are the Rams going to do then? That's going to be great. Oh, and then it's worth noting, Jordan Cameron, the tight end, 2 catches for 6 yards. So Jordan Cameron, the tight end, the Seahawks do defend the tight end. Applause break, applause break, applause break, applause break. And so that's a good thing. Next week, I don't know who the Rams tight end is right now. I know that they've had the same guy, Hendricks, for a while, but Kendricks for a while, and Tyler Higbee, and it was the rookie that they drafted in the 4th round that they really like, that had some certainly some off-field problems that I know other fans will bring up, but I try to avoid necessarily throwing, any sort of stones in that regard, and just sticking to, the people who are playing. So if Higbee's playing, I got to take him as a significant offensive threat that could have been a higher draft pick, perhaps, if not for his off-field issues. But they've been looking for that tight end because Lance Kendricks is fine, but not great. And so, like, that's going to be another thing is defending the tight ends for the Rams. But I'm not too worried about Kenny Britt. And we'll see what they do with Tavon Austin starting on Monday. But overall, I think that the Rams game, Seattle probably will be favored, but not by very many. It just depends, too, how they look or what player injuries may happen on Monday night. But overall, Seahawks should be favored. But definitely after watching this game, I would say that it's a lot closer than we would have hoped as Seattle Seahawks fans. And that's going to be the thing, is that another low-scoring game, try to win the game, doing many of the same things that you did do today and not doing some of the dumb mistakes like the fumble, like the interception, trying to – if you clean those things up, then I think the Seahawks obviously will be more successful and not be in a position to have to win with 31 seconds left on a touchdown pass to Doug Baldwin. Overall, I think the Seahawks come out of this looking at it and saying – I have faith that Russell Wilson is still the great elite quarterback that he was going into the season. No concerns there. I think if you're concerned there, you should take up something that's not sports. Maybe not sports. Being a fan is maybe not your thing. That's fine. Not everyone has to be a fan of things, or at least find like being a fan of things that are more consistent. Like you can be a fan perhaps of something, I don't know, collecting trading cards or something like that. Maybe they're going to come out with the same trading cards, the same like comic book cards and stuff every year, and there's going to be some consistency with the kind that you like, and they'll always be the same trading card and always be at the same performance. It'll always be that same one of Professor Xavier, and it'll always be the same, and you won't be worried, and that's going to be great, isn't it? Because Russell Wilson and human beings are going to perform differently week to week, and we're going to have to be able to understand that and have consistent emotions about it. So Russell Wilson's going to be fine. Hopefully there's no injury there, no long-term injury, nothing concerning there. So I think that's fine. Doug Baldwin confirmed that he is playing at a higher level than he had prior to the middle of 2015. That's great. Jimmy Graham, healthy. That's great. Thomas Rawls, healthy. That's great. Kristen Michael played pretty well and could be an additional weapon that they didn't have last year. That's great. Paul Richardson, healthy. That's great. Tyler Lockett, want to get him more involved, but healthy. And last season we saw how talented he is, so that's great. Offensive line, worse than we thought. That's not great. So there are definitely negatives. CJ Prosise, stay out there, stay healthy, buddy. We want to see you out there, and for that to get injured right away, even if you did come back, not great. So I'm going to get a not great on that. And I'll go ahead on the defensive side of the ball. Richard Sherman seems like normal. Richard Sherman, that's great. Deshaun Shedd, better than we thought, perhaps. That's great. Thurl Simon was inactive today. Not great. Jeremy Lane, I recall him, having that big tackle on the tight end, Jordan Cameron, and I thought that was a fun play to watch. Overall, his play, I can't say for sure, but I think it was good, and I think that's enough to give him a that's great. Jaron Reed, that's great. Michael Bennett and Cliff Averill and Frank Clark, that's great. Didn't hear Quentin Jefferson's name a lot today. I don't know exactly how he played specifically, but I do think that overall the line play, and he only had one tackle, but I think overall the line play was really good. And so I'm going to say that's great. Linebackers, KJ Wright, leading tackler on the game. Heard his name early in the game. I'm trying to rack my brain to see why I heard it, and I feel like it was a missed tackle or something like that. Not good. But overall, I think that when you look at how they played against tight ends, and the fact that Wright had 11 tackles and a sack, that's great. Bobby Wagner was in the backfield being active. I'm going to give him a that's great. Cam Chancellor, 7 tackles, including 1 for a loss. I think Cam Chancellor played well. And I think there could have been some problems with the safeties overall. He was very neutral. Earl Thomas, not great. But is Earl Thomas a 26 or 27-year-old all-pro safety, one of the greatest under 28 safeties and defensive players of all time? Yes. I'm not concerned about Earl Thomas. Earl Thomas is going to figure that out. It's a bad day for Earl Thomas. Overall, though, not going to be too worried about that. Mike Morgan in the Sam position, just not very worthy of even discussion. Cassius Marsh on special teams, that's great. Makes you feel better about the changes there, and with the retirement of Ricardo Lockett and having to find other guys that are good on special teams. When it was there was an area of concern about special teams coverage last season, so that's great. Tyler Lockett didn't return any kicks, but he did return 3 punts, and one of them went for 22 yards. That's great. Overall, Darrell Bevell and the play calling on offense, definitely, you can't give him a that's great. He's going to say that they didn't do the things that they wanted. They weren't able to take the advantage to put up, even one touchdown until 30 seconds left in the game. So not great. But this is a team that was number 1 in offensive DVOA last season. This is a team that has led the NFL in rushing consistently for the last 4 or 5 years. I'm not worried about the offense, and I think Darrell Bevell's hate is from a large contingent of people that are not able to blame anyone other than a faceless name. To most of them, a faceless name that is making the calls and not saying whether or not it's execution, and just saying, well, I like Pete Carroll and I like Russell Wilson, and I know Pete Carroll because I see his face all the time and he gives these great speeches, and I know Russell Wilson because I watch him all the time. But Darrell Bevell is just a guy in a castle, and he's calling the plays, and we only scored 10, 12 points. Fire him. I don't care how many points they scored. I don't care what they've done with personnel in the past. I don't care what they've done with, not good offensive linemen. I don't give a shit. Fire his ass. I have a memory longer than that, and I'm going to say that based on all of the offensive accomplishments that the Seahawks have had since 2012, I'm actually going to say that it's fine offensively. Just as like I think that Tom Cable, what he's done to elevate 7th-rounders and undrafted free agents into starting offensive linemen is enough for me to not be worried and start throwing Tom Cable and Darrell Bevell under the bus. And above all else, Pete Carroll is the captain of the ship, and everything that happens on your ship is your responsibility. So if you have a problem with 12 points, you have a problem with Pete Carroll. And if you don't have the balls to say that, and you're going to shuck that responsibility to Darrell Bevell, I think that you're sort of, just not taking full credit to say who you're going to put the blame on. Pete Carroll has just as much responsibility for what's going on offense and defense, play calling wise, as anybody else. He put these guys in these positions, and if he didn't like them, then he can always take the chance to tell them what to do differently in the future, or he can replace them. So, but I don't think that there's any reason to replace Darrell Bevell. If anything, I think when they replace Darrell Bevell, it'll be because he gets a head coaching job, maybe one at the college level. But I do think that Darrell Bevell will leave for a head coaching position because he's got so many accomplishments. And if the Seahawks do go deep into the playoffs this year, I totally see that happening. Moving to overall, that can't give the Seahawks a that's great rating, but he would say that individually there's enough that's greats that it came in than there are that's not great, that I would say that overall I feel good about the personnel, and so I feel good about them improving as the season goes on. And it's just great that they got a 1-0 instead of an 0-1. So nice job, Seahawks, to at least get the win, clean up those mistakes, and come back next week against the LA Rams. Go to 2-0, and then all of a sudden you're going to play out the San Francisco 49ers. And then if you go into that game and you get that game and you go 3-0, much more momentum going into New York to play the Jets, and then going into a bye week. They go into that bye week at 3-1, feels good. If they go in at 4-0, that's great. So that's it for the Instant Seaside Reactions podcast. Fieldgoals.com, @fieldgoals, @Kenneth Arthur S. And thank you for sitting with me by the seaside right after the game.